Special friend of the museum, our Chief Unity Officer, Gabe Diaz.
Thank you, Mariah. Thank you, Mariah. So yes, welcome, welcome, welcome. My name is Gabe Diaz. I serve this great city as the Executive Director for the Unity Commission, as well as the LGBTQ liaison to our City Manager's office. Quick question. Raise your hand if this is your first time in this building. He made you put your hand down. You've been here before? I forgot. You forgot, okay. Well, welcome back. First timers. Once again. Great, great, great. So welcome, welcome, welcome to our beautiful museum. We would encourage you all to please join us back for another exhibit. The museum gallery is closed now, but we welcome you back during regular business hours. There's some amazing exhibits, 2 floors, and we invite you back. We have an amazing conversation that's going to take place this afternoon, and we're excited to be able to present this expert in the field. She's a good friend of mine, a good colleague of mine, a recurring facilitator for Hampton Diversity College. And all the programs that we do here in the city of Hampton, we want to make sure that we're welcoming, that we're supportive, and that we're inclusive of all people, regardless of their gender, their age, their socioeconomic status. Wherever you are, we want to meet you here with equity, with diversity, and inclusion here in the city of Hampton. So welcome to tonight's conversation. I have the great pleasure of introducing our featured speaker for this evening, Ms. Chadra Pittman. Chadra is a native of Bronx, New York. She is a feminist, anthropologist, human rights consultant, social justice, and remembrance expert. Chadra holds a BA in anthropology and African American studies from George Mason University and graduated summa cum laude from the University of Alabama, UAB, with a Master's of Arts in Anthropology of Peace and Human Rights. As the founder and the executive director of the Sankofa Projects and Forever is the acronym for End Violence, End Rape. Chadra works to eradicate sexual and systemic violence while creating safe spaces for deaf and LGBTQIA+ inclusion. She's a former public educator for the New York African Burial Ground Project and necro-ritualist, and a creator of Sankofa's International Day of Remembrance, the only Middle Passage ceremony in coastal Virginia, now in its 14th year. Chadra commemorates the past through rituals of remembrance by giving voice to America's untold history. Though her memory and memorialization projects, she has created Remembrance for William and Mary's Law School, the Association for African American Museums, Nicole Hannah Jones' 1619 Project, Jamestown Yorktown Foundation, the American Revolution, and NASA pioneer Dr. Katherine G. Johnson. Chadra is an avid researcher. She is also published by the Feminist Wire, the Association for Black Anthropologists, and the Institute for Human Rights, UAB. And her work is featured in NPR, Al Jazeera, and USA Today. So we've got a star here with us tonight. Yes, she has an upcoming chapter to be published by Burhan Books entitled Decolonizing Europe and the Problem of Neo-Nationalism, co-authored with Jordan Kuiper. She has presented lectures at Columbia, Hampton, and Brandeis University, the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute, and the National Women's Study Association. Most recently, Chadra was commissioned to orchestrate an opening ceremony at the Barnard College for the inaugural Zora Neale Hurston Summit. She is also a proud mother of 2 amazing sons and a loving caregiver to her mother. Please, please, please welcome Chadra Pittman.
Warm welcome. Oh, it's so good to see everybody. Ooh, that light is bright. Okay. Can I move that a little bit?
We can trim it down.
That would be good.
You want to see you for the camera on?
Oh, okay. But I want to see them.
Absolutely.
And I'm seeing dots now. So I'm so happy to see all of you here. I keep, everyone I see, thank you for coming. And thank you for being here. And thank you for being in this space. I'm glad you all made it safe, and I wish you safe departure home. Just want to say that. The conversation tonight The conversation tonight is America's Inconvenient Truths. And we are in a time that is quite challenging. But as I tell people, we've seen this before. So we just need to be prepared. We need to realize who our allies are and do the work, because we will not be erased. Exclamation point. So, now what I will say is that the room is full, which I'm so happy, and I know that there are people home watching. Please feel free. I mean, I'm up here, but normally I'm moving around. So they try to keep me here at the mic, but I really like to move, so I'm gonna have to stay here, but I wanna be there and out here. So, but I always tell them I'm a mother, I yell, so, you know, not yell at my kids, but I can project my voice. Thank you, my dear friend. So, without further ado, but if you have questions, please let me know. I would love for it to be interactive. I don't want to be a talking head up here. This is our conversation about our history, our collective history. I always tell people that slavery, a lot of times people talk about slavery and they say, oh, especially February, I'm very busy. I'm busy during December for Kwanzaa. I'm like, you do know we talk about black people in July. Okay. So our history there's enough history that we could talk about it every day of the year, all day of every day of the year, and still not have enough time and space to talk about it. So, the inconvenient truths. Okay. Seems like the slides. Okay, ours is a tale of blood streaking the Atlantic. This was said by Pauline Murray, and I give homage to her first. She was a gay woman who was a priest, a lawyer. She was all the things, and actually Ruth Bader Ginsburg quotes her as being the person who helped to move the movement forward, especially for women. Sankofa, the notion of Sankofa is in order to go where? Forward, you have to go backwards, right? Right? So you have to go forward. In order to go forward, you have to go backward. You have to return and fetch it. A lot of people don't realize Sankofa is actually a word that is an Adinkra symbol from the Côte d'Ivoire region of Ghana. It's in Ghana and also Côte d'Ivoire. And it is an Adinkra symbol, which is a funerary cloth. So basically, when people pass away, they give a cloth or they give this symbol to their loved ones. And there's hundreds of different symbols. Sankofa is just one of the Adinkra symbols. So with Sankofa, we excavate history. We talk about the untold stories. We advocate for social justice and human rights, and we honor ancestors through remembrance, like we're going to do on Saturday, June 14th. I always say with Remembrance, we focus on the people, the famous and the forgotten. So yes, there's the Katherine Johnsons, but there's also the millions that are laying beneath the water in the Atlantic Ocean. We also look at critical time periods that shape history and look at the sacred spaces, like places like Fort Monroe, which is a UNESCO site of memory now. It has been, it's qualified, it's met the qualifications to be a place where they recognize that slavery happened. Something important happened there. So we engage in difficult and necessary conversations, which is what part of this will be about. The goal is not to make anybody feel uncomfortable, but James Baldwin says that, you know, guilt, people's feelings of guilt or shame or any of those things, we really have got to do what we need to do to put that aside, because we don't have time. There is an urgency right now. We don't have time for guilt, we don't have time for shame, we have time for action and for people to get together and work together. So the topics that we talk about in Sankofa, from race to sexual violence, social justice, Black Lives Matter, Women Lives Matter, LGBTQIA, femicide, and human rights. Ruth Benedict, love her, feminist anthropologist, said that the purpose of anthropology is to make the world safe for human differences. And right now we are in a time where the world is not safe to be different or to be human at this point. What's interesting is that the person who is occupying the White House, as I shall call him, will defend Confederate heritage. We're seeing that. We have seen that. This is dating back to 2020. Yet, some heritage, some history is being erased. And this is Phil Freelon. He's an architect of the African American Museum who is now an ancestor. Carter G. Woodson told us that if race has no worthwhile tradition, it will be exterminated. So I thought about what to talk about for this lecture. We always talk about the middle passage, and I was thinking, this reminds me of Al Gore's film, An Inconvenient Truth, right? This crisis of global, those of you who are not familiar, Al Gore, former VP of the United States, he did a film talking about global warming many years ago, talking about the same things we're still talking about today, sadly. But he wanted to shine a light on what was happening with our planet, because there is no planet B. We have one planet, and we really need to take care of it, and we're not. I thought this was quite ironic. So from some of the first list of words that have been banned are climate change. So the very issue that Gore was trying to put forth is on the list of words that has been by the president who's occupying the White House. Inconvenient truth. So what is an inconvenient truth? Something we don't want to talk about, right? It's difficult, like a lot of things, but it must be acknowledged. We often find with the Holocaust, people will talk about that, as they should. It was an atrocity. This is in Syria, a little boy, 5-year-old, identified. They say a picture says 1,000 words, right? And then we have Gaza, right? So people can talk about these sorts of things, but people find it very hard to, point the finger back. They say when you're pointing a finger, you're pointing back at you, or 3 pointing back at you, if you include your thumb as 4. But people have a hard time looking at what's happening right here in this country. And Baldwin says he loves America, but he has to criticize it. It's important. We have quite a few atrocities, do we not? So we have the Native American genocide. We have the transatlantic slave trade. We have the Trail of Tears, forced removal of people off their land. We have a terrible, inconvenient truth that America needs to reconcile, the Tuskegee experiment, where black men were given syphilis. And it was an experiment, right, with human lives. And this changed the way in which medicine, it was supposed to change the way in which consent is given for medical procedures. We know that that's not exactly the case. It doesn't happen all the time, but this is one of America's inconvenient truths. We also know Japanese internment camps. A lot of times when I say internment, people think I'm talking about Germany or the Holocaust. We had Japanese Americans in internment camps in the United States. The Servicemen Readjustment Act, also known as the GI Bill, inconvenient truth. The fact is that black men, like their other servicemen, went over and fought. When they got back, they did not receive the benefits, the housing benefits. They did not receive the college stipends, right, to go to college. But they fought in the same war. But because of who they were, when they got back here, they were denied access. And the reason why I mention this is because you have to think about the long-term effect of this, right? So people coming back from war, families are devastated. All families are devastated. Someone's coming back, they're trying to get 2 and 3 steps ahead. Well, if you're denied education, you're not able to get a home, it's gonna push you back. So when people talk about now, well, why are things, you need to get over it, it was so long ago. 1944 wasn't that long ago. And a lot of people suffered. So in honor of World Pride Day, which just was yesterday in DC, the inconvenient truths of the 1950s, right? People who love people who are of the same sex that they are treated unfairly and even killed in this country and beyond. And many of the people we love, the authors, James Baldwin. We love James Baldwin. James Baldwin was a gay man. And we have to get to a point where we talk about the humanity of humans and stop criticizing how people show up in the world. Ruby Bridges, 1960, just trying to go to school. America's Inconvenient Truth. How segregation in education is still happening in this country. When you look at voucher systems, in certain places in the United States, vouchers will give access to better education. Some schools, I remember in a school that my children were in, they didn't have a bus route. Well, that was clever. Certain kids who did not have the means to get to school via car were not able to get there. The Pettus Bridge. And we know in these cases, the resistance to allowing people the right to vote. That's why when I often talk to younger people, I remind them, oh, voting doesn't make a difference. I'm like, people died for the right to vote. It is important to cast your vote. We are still being affected by redlining. Communities were segregated. Black people were allowed to live only in certain areas. That is still happening today. Lower income communities were created. They did not just appear. It was intentional. So the slave trade, another inconvenient truth. It's an international truth because everyone was involved in the slave trade. Everyone. And everyone benefited, really, except for those who were enslaved. Geography is important. Catherine McKittrick says in Demonic Grounds, geography is always human, and humanness is always geographic. And that's particularly important when we're talking about the enslavement trade, because Africans were on board, what? Ships. And ships move. And so their humanity changes. They were probably very human, or considered human in Africa, in their home place. Once they traversed those waters and went into other places, they were othered. They were considered less than. They were dehumanized. I thought this was interesting. CNN did a great job on this, so shout out to CNN. But I wanted to share this with you, that, maps are important, are they not? Yes. Goodness gracious. I know I need my car Google thing telling me where I'm going, turn left. I don't know how I did maps years ago when we didn't have that. I don't know how I figured out where I was going. Can you all relate to that? Okay. So maps are important. So the Mercator map is a popular map that is basically the map that we all use. It's the maps that we grew up with, which disproportionately makes Africa very small. Very small. So this is showing, I'd love to get up. I can show you. Anything over here? I know, be my luck. Okay, sorry. Sorry about that. Okay. So this is just showing, I just want to show, oh, thanks. So the real size of Africa was downplayed on maps. Why do you think? Why would they downplay the size of Africa in comparison to Europe and other places? Less significant, although it's a place where all the resources are, right? Minerals, diamonds, right? But there's an intentionality. There's an intentionality behind that. Look at the United States. As far as the size, they made it that much bigger. Russia as well, right? And so when these sorts of things are done, the actual, okay, the actual continent is created smaller than it needs to be, you know, these are the things that make us ponder why, right? Why was that done? Why did they need to minimize Africa and make Europe large? The countries that fit inside of Africa, I thought this was phenomenal. They have the United States, Spain, Ireland, Germany, France, Norway, Colombia, Finland, Greece, Italy, Turkey, Poland, China, Ukraine, India, and the United Kingdom would all fit inside the continent of Africa. Maps are important. And what's also as important, who is designing the maps? Who's in the room for the meetings, right? So, the Peterson projection map is a more realistic map, and there's a school in Boston that is actually working to make sure that this is the map that people are using moving forward. But, so even what we grew up looking at on the map, right, in school, in geography, that was a lie. That was a lie. That was not the truth. Africa was created very small, intentionally, and symbolically, to, I guess, let us know what they thought about the people there. He got lost. Can we say that together? Can we just, a communal, he got lost? He got lost, okay? He got lost. Maps are important, very important, and he got lost. I just needed to put that in there. Also, because we're talking about the Gulf of Mexico, right, versus the Gulf of America, you know, 20 years from now, we will be talking about this time, about what this means. Intentionally changing names from Mexico to America. Maps are what? Important, yes. And so that brings us to the Negroes' burial ground. This was a map from the 1700s. I'll go back. Map from the 1700s that identifies the plot of land that was the African burial ground in New York. I'll get back to that in a second. But what we're talking about here, a lot of what this is about collective memory. What do we remember? Like when I was talking about the maps, and we were all like, yeah, I remember that map, and oh, it's unfortunate, it wasn't factual, right? Collective memory is the way in which information is transferred, and how we remember what happened as a collective, as a group. The World Trade Center is where I worked for many years, and the African burial ground is actually housed in this area, same area. There was a rediscovery in that area of bones that were discovered. The General Service Administration bought a building. They said, we're going to build this $276 million building, and it's going to house the FBI, the CIA, but before they could build the building, they had to do what's known as a cultural resource survey. That is to protect anything historical under the ground. When they did that, they found, they found a map that said Negroes' burial ground. They said, it was hundreds of years ago. There's nothing there. Well, there was. And in the original burial ground, there's 10 to 20,000. Let me say that again. In the original burial ground in New York City, the Wall Street area, Duane and Reed Streets, 10 to 20,000 African men, women, and children are buried underneath New York. Skyscrapers. They found waste beads, proving that Africans brought their culture with them. Okay? I always like to point this out, and I'm not going to fall. I always like to point out. Cowrie shell. It's a cowrie shell. And I always like to point that out because, can you see the shape of it? Yeah. So it's a cowrie shell which was used for currency. was used for currency. But this proves that Africans brought their culture here with them. Despite what was said, that Africans lost their culture, they didn't bring anything, all they brought with them was their temperament. The inconvenient truth is that slavery existed, that it was horrific. Slavery in New York was just as heinous and barbaric as the South. Africans came to the North for freedom, yes, but slavery existed in the North. And the evidence from the bones at the African burial ground, the kinds of bruising, the kinds of endoscopy, I can't think of it. There's a word, enthesopathies. It's a ripping away of the muscle from the bone, which causes an indentation in the bone. So when they say that they were worked to death, they were literally worked to death. Enthesopathies. We also had markings proving that Africans brought their culture with him. Here's an ad from 1776 where it talks about that this person had a mark of his country on each cheek. So, proving that this person, right, brought his culture with him. And it also says that he is an Igbo Negro. So not only do you have the markings, the actual markings on his face, you actually have them writing about. So they're acknowledging his culture. They're acknowledging he's Igbo. They're acknowledging that he has marks on his face. Space becomes sacralized and ancestral landscapes. And what we do at Remembrance, for those of you who come, if you haven't come, please join us. If you've been there before, please come again. We are remembering a past that this country and others would like for us to forget. And we are in the midst of a time where that kind of erasure is ubiquitous, it's everywhere. Hertzkovitz says that American Negroes, under their skin, are but Africans. And that slide of the person with the indentations, the scars, or the marks, scar is actually even a term that we shouldn't use because scar means, right, there's injury. That was an intentional marking. So the intentional marking on his face proves his heritage. At the burial ground, we also did ceremonies of remembrance. And this is when, in 1996, an African priest, he's wearing the kufi in the front, he came to apologize for his participation in the slave trade. We're still waiting on this country to do the same, but I digress. We're waiting on this country to do the same, is what I said. There has yet to be a reckoning for what slavery was. And I always say to people, you know, if you think about just the math of it, 400 years, hundreds of years of free labor, because we think slavery started really in the 1600s. That's what a lot of the information. In British North America, here, 1619, yes, is where Fort Monroe, slavery. But slavery unto itself began in the 1400s and didn't end until the 1865-ish. Because if you think about what's happening in prisons, people are still enslaved. I mean, if you really look at that document, the 13th Amendment, people are, it says, unless you are in jail. So you're free unless you are in jail. So anyway, point being, there needs to be an atonement. And I really think that a lot of the things that are happening and have happened have to do with the fact that there has been a debt not paid to the ancestors, the Native and the African, and really all people who have been maltreated. Equiano was enslaved, and he talked about the experience on being on the ships. He talked about the rattling of chains, the smacking of the whips, the groans and the cries. So this is his account of what it was like to be on an enslavement ship. And I really think in this country, children should read his story. I think there's nothing better than a firsthand account of history. I mean, we can talk about what happened, but if you have somebody who actually experienced it, There's an authenticity to the story that you don't get. Audrey, in honor of pride, poet, feminist, said it's not our differences, but our inability to recognize them. There's nothing wrong with the fact that we are different from one another. We need to celebrate that. That's a beautiful thing. I love to meet people who look nothing like me and talk languages that I don't know what they're talking about. And I always ask them, well, can you tell me how to say such and such? I'm curious about other people and their lives and their languages. But to villainize difference and make it this horrible thing that, we all need to be the same. We're a melting pot. That's not true. We're not a melting pot. We are a tossed salad. Our cucumbers are cucumbers, our tomatoes are tomatoes, right? Our spinach is spinach, our kale. It's all different, and that's beautiful. That's what makes it rich. What if you just ate iceberg lettuce without the dressing? Okay, boring, right? It wouldn't be good. So the beauty is in the diversity of the salad, just like us as humans. So who is remembered, who is forgotten, and who decides? So we already know, as I said, Carter G. Woodson said that we have to make sure that if race has no history, we will be exterminated, in danger of being exterminated. This happened in 1996. Rodney King, right? Well, what's happening now? History is repeating itself. We are literally watching the repeat of history. In Berlin, 1933, the burning of books. What is happening now? We have the modern day burning of books. And this is so interesting. It says that the text that was added and the text that was removed, so it says, as are those who have faced previous discrimination in the healthcare system, including children and youth of color, immigrant children, children with disabilities, and those who are LGBTQ+. Why is that a problem, to take that out? It's factual. People have been discriminated against. Why is there a fear in talking about the truth? Education. America's first. So these are the terms they want to avoid. DEI, women, minority, underrepresented. Say again. Right. I mean, identity, inclusion, sex education. I mean, isn't it important for children to be educated about their bodies so they can make informed decisions and be safe? I would think so. So, yeah, Jonathan Friedman said, how can we have intelligent or difficult conversations if we can't even use the words? Seriously. I mean, it really comes down to that. These are a list of the banned words. Another one who's banned, right, The Bluest Eye, author Toni Morrison, says that memory is a form of willed creation. We collectively must be deliberate about remembering. We cannot allow them to force us to forget the past. We lived it, we experienced it, we have collective memory of being in rooms together. We know what happened. Do not let them gaslight you about the truth. So American exceptionalism. Alex de Tocqueville actually first said it, talked of this notion of exceptionalism when he visited the US. And basically American exceptionalism is that they think America's great in everything. Like we can do no wrong, which is not true for anyone. We all have faults. And America has hers, has his too. So I thought this was interesting. American exceptionalism, except for all the people underneath, right? And you, right? So what's interesting, I think, about this notion of Americans' inconvenience truths is that we have a travel ban that was just put into effect. 7 out of the 12 countries are African countries. Meanwhile, on the flip side, the occupant of the White House has welcomed 59 white South Africans as refugees to this country, saying that they are being killed and targeting them and saying that it is a racial war. And I wonder, I'm like, does he know what apartheid looked like in South Africa? Does he know that Nelson Mandela was jailed for 27 years? Does he know how many people were killed and forced off of their land? Right. Well, he probably doesn't. We know, but I wouldn't give that much credit. But the people around him, I'm sure, could let him know that taking in people who are refugees, I think, is a fantastic thing to do. But to do it solely based on race and to make it about race is problematic when you are, on the flip side, banning Africans from this country. This is American exceptionalism. This was at the January 6th insurrection, and she's holding a noose. Let us not forget what this country did, another American inconvenient truth, the lynchings that happened in this country. I picked this photo in particular because he's way in the background. There are other really graphic images which I wouldn't dare show, but American exceptionalism. Ida B. Wells' ancestor says no other nation burns its criminals under the stars and stripes. Is a human holocaust possible? So America's great, but we are burning and we are lynching our own. The reality is that if we lose our freedoms, and this is one of the things I believe that Abraham Lincoln said, that if we lose our freedoms, it will come because we destroyed ourselves. And that's the sounding of the alarm, I think, that we need to really, really pay attention to. Now, because my work is human rights, I could not pass up this opportunity to talk about genocide, which is horrible. But interestingly enough, the occupant as well said that white people in South Africa are being killed, that there's a genocide, right? In reality, he showed images from the war in the Congo. So fact-checking is important. Mandela says that poverty is not an accident. None of these things, slavery, apartheid, it is up to us to change them. According to the United Nations, though, you cannot just arbitrarily call something a genocide. You can't. And so the fact that he did speaks to this notion of American exceptionalism. He can do whatever he wants to do, but there's actually a process. There's the United Nations Convention on the Punishment and Prevention of the Crime of Genocide that was enacted after the Holocaust, I might add. And it is to prevent and to punish for genocide. This is a genocide that actually happened. 800,000 Rwandans, Tutsis, and the Hutu were massacred violently by their neighbors because of this propaganda that was put out by the Belgium and the European countries that were involved, basically had them fighting each other. And they did it based on phenotype. They said, oh, you look like more Belgium, so you're on a higher status than the Hutu. So they pitted them really against each other. But this, I point this out because this is an actual genocide. 800,000 people murdered is a genocide. And by genocide, the Greek word genos, which means race or tribe, and then Latin side is for killing. That's the intentional killing of people based on their race, on their tribe that they're from, okay? And so I recently got this in the mail from a friend of mine who writes about truth. He and his wife actually write about truth. And this was a quote in his book by Du Bois, and I thought it was so important that, you know, we as nations make mistakes. And, but we have to tell the truth about them. Yes, Aaron. And it's important that we tell the truth. We get nothing by covering our eyes and saying that these things didn't happen, because they did. And we remember collectively what happened. They often tell us we will never forget. right? This is 9/11. This is the World Trade Center, right? We'll never forget. But this happened last year. This was on the Hampton history page. And I wanted to show it to you because this is what I deal with all the time. People telling me, give it a break, Americans are over it. Really? Who's over it? But let's just go back though, right? But we'll never forget this that happened in 2001. But yet you want me to forget this. And collectively, as Americans, we all should be horrified by what happened during the transatlantic slave trade. During Remembrance, listen, during the civil rights movement, during many movements, we've had people that didn't look like us. The pride movements, the women movements had a couple of good men that stood by us. During the LGBT movement, a couple of straight people that came out and said, you know what, not on my watch. So there's always people that may not look like you that can come to the rescue. But we are not going to forget this history, nor these ancestors, nor what they went through. So at Remembrance, we come out, we put flowers into the water to honor the ancestors. We engage in Kemetic prayers, Akan prayers, Yoruba, Santeria, Palo, different traditions. And we embrace people, some who we know, some who we don't know. This is known as fictive kinship. We have this relationship with people not based in knowing them, but we know them spiritually from another place. We know that the beginning of humanity started in Africa, 3.2 million years ago. Although African history, they say it begins with enslavement, we know that it does not. We know that there was a hierarchy of humanity that was created that put Europeans at the top and put Africans on the bottom. And From Savage to Negro, Lee Baker says that the first American anthropologists were aimed at setting the Negroes apart from whites and defining the Negro's place in nature. Now, this was back in the 1800s, this whole notion of creating this separation, the 1700s, the 1600s. But think about this. When we think about the map that was created, right? So if they are setting and having Negroes in a certain place, it would make sense the map would be made smaller, right? That they would take away, do things to take away from the fact that the origin of humanity began in Africa. Samuel Morton was a physician and a scientist, and he, as well as quite a few others, were involved in creating this notion of this hierarchy. It's a social construction of race, and there was an evolutionary hierarchy of man. And that, again, was intentional. Joanne Blumenbach, it's important to mention him because he said that the skulls, he looked at the skulls, said the skulls were so beautiful, and that primitive color of mankind must have started in Europe. It must have been white people because the skulls were white. Now, I'm just going to say, this reminds me, I feel like I'm having deja vu with regards to some people who are leading some departments right now, right? You have people who are not as educated, who are not as informed, and people like this are setting the standard for education and for this idea that Europeans are more intelligent than Africans. Continue to have African sentiments about Africa that were anti-African. Talked about the dark continent, Richard Leakey. It was not viewed as a place, you know, for noble Homo sapiens, which we are as humans, that it couldn't have started there, right? We know that race is biological, not a biological concept. It is a social construct. It has nothing to do with your biology. It has to do with a social construct that was created. And so if we only hear stories that say that Africa's a really small place on the map and that Africans never did anything and that slavery didn't really happen, then we risk a critical misunderstanding about ourselves and about other people. We know that slavery happened on the timeline in Africa, but it was not the beginning. There was Africa before slavery. On this day, June 4th, 1775, I wanted to just put this in here because I think this is interesting. This was an ad that speaks about a Negro fellow, about 5'6", born in Jamaica, speaks good English. He probably spoke patois, but this happened on this day, 1775. A runaway was put into the newspaper, advertising that they wanted to get him back. Sale of Negroes. Central Park 5, history's repeating itself. Falsely accused, 1989. And so what this does is that when you have this information, this misinformation, it causes a racialized worldview that is incorrect. And things like the bell curve, which take attacks at the intelligence of people of color, all of these things create a worldview that has Africans in a lesser position than other people. Maya reminds us that history cannot be unlived. And we have to remember that as we are watching the news, and hopefully you're not obsessing over the news, but as we are watching the news and paying attention to what the rhetoric that's out there, which is really troubling and upsetting for a lot of us. It cannot be unlived, but it doesn't need to be lived again. So we have to, in our circles, in our churches, in our jobs, we really have to speak up. Speak up and speak out about the injustices, not just against the people who look like you or who are married or who are not married. You know, for everyone. We as a humanity need to come together. And that's what we do at Remembrance. Remembrance is really a beautiful mixture, diverse group of people who come out on the second Saturday in June, and this year it will be June 14th, this upcoming Saturday, to talk about slavery, to talk about these Africans who never received a proper burial, to acknowledge the fact that they lived and died, to acknowledge the fact that they walked on board enslavement ships, were forced to the bottom of these ships, were held captive for months at a time. They died beneath the top of the ship. They were thrown into the Atlantic Ocean. Some of them were healthy when they were discarded because they ran out of food. They ran out of water. So the captain has to eat. So who's discarded? Whose life is not worthwhile? Again, who is remembered, who is forgotten, and who decides? The past and the present, the living and the dead are connected. We have an obligation to those of us, those who came before us. We have an obligation to remember them. Because the reality is we would not be here. None of us would be here had it not been for our parents, for our grandparents, for their parents, and we can keep going back. So in the spirit of pride, Rustin says, let us be enraged about injustice, but let us not be destroyed by it. And so, with that, Remembrance, as I said, is happening on Saturday, June 14th, 2025, 11 o'clock, Fort Monroe. I do want to say this. When I was speaking about Negroes, and I mentioned Negro this and Negro that, I typically use Negro when I'm quoting. I typically don't use Negro. I always tell people, Negro in Spanish is black, right? But is there a Negro land? Negroland, is it? Can you point to it on a map? No. That in itself was intentional. Calling people negro as opposed to calling people African was a way to disconnect the African from their homeland. There's nothing wrong with negro as far as the color, being black, that sort of thing, but I'm talking about identifying a person to a homeland, right? Italians come from Italy, right? Spanish people come from Spain or other places. Mexicans come from Mexico. Africans come from Africa, not Negro land. So with that, I'll open it up for questions. If anybody has any questions, comments, yes?
If we could just wait for the microphone because we do have an audience watching online and I want everyone to hear us. Thank you so very much, Chadra. Thank you, thank you.
I just have a question about the Remembrance. It says 11 a.m. CDT.
Oh,
so
that should be EST.
okay,
Sorry.
that's why I wanted to know because I
Sorry.
didn't want to miss it.
Yep,
It'll
I'm
be too
glad you
late.
said that, yeah. I'm actually living in Alabama now, so everything I'm an East Coast woman, and I have to switch everything to CST and CDT, so I apologize, yes. It's 11 o'clock Eastern Standard Time at Outlook Beach, Fort Monroe.
So wonderful to see you, Queen.
So wonderful to see you.
Yes, yes. Just a couple of comments or want to get your take on something. You talked about slavery ending in 1865, but according to the 13th Amendment, it still is practiced through the prison system. I also want to add to that, sharecropper was also a form of slavery. I ran across, or I found a agreement of my great-great-great-grandfather with his, he was a sharecropper.
Okay.
And the agreement was basically a slave agreement where you would work this land, your children would work this land, you would get this amount of money at the end of the year, and if you didn't yield any crops, you would get nothing.
Right.
So I found that and I was blown away. This was in 1868, I believe, where I found the document. Yeah. The second thing is, with everything that's going on now in this country, I hear a lot of people, even people who are quote unquote allies, and I'm starting to find out that sometimes a lot of allies are just a lie.
Oh, okay.
Some of them.
That's clever. Yeah.
And what I'm finding is everything that's going on in this country, a lot of them are comparing it to Nazi Germany.
Okay.
And do you think that the reason that they're doing that is because they want to still take the responsibility off of America? Because actually Hitler looked at Jim Crow
Absolutely.
and created Nazi Germany.
Right.
So we had the KKK before,
Right.
the camps in Germany.
Right.
So I was wondering if you thought that they're doing that to, again, escape accountability for this country?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's six in one hand, half a dozen in the other. I mean, I think that there are some people, yes, that it's easier to talk about what happened over there. Oh my God, it's so horrible, look what they did, right? It's very easy to point the finger and place blame over there. It's harder to look in the mirror. That's why I was saying, like in the presentation, we don't want to talk about the Japanese internment camps. We don't want to talk about the fact that femicide in this country, women are killed at rates that are staggering. 1 in 3 women will suffer sexual violence. Trans women of color are killed at high rates. Yeah, so I think it's both and. I think that there are people, yes, that want to escape and don't want to deal with the fact that what's happening here. I think what it does, though, what's happening does remind people. I think that's what's happening, too. People are looking at it and saying, because for some people who have never experienced injustice, that's the only reference that they have. But if you are a person of color and you have lived through, that's why I say for some people, this is not new. I mean, for what some of our grandparents went through, this is the same kind of, it's a different face, but not that much has changed. There have always, I remember when COVID happened, and we had these bans, we had these restrictions, right? We couldn't go certain places. We had to have curfews. And people were losing their minds in different parts of the world, in parts of the United States especially. People wanted to get haircuts. They wanted to go out and get a beer. They were angry. For many of us, black people, we had curfews not that long ago.
Yeah, when the street lights come on.
Okay, women know where we can't go. We can't go certain places and be safe. We know that when we walk to our cars, we need to have our keys out. I mean, so for people who have felt unsafe, for people who are marginalized, for people who have lived in that space, we know what this is. But I think for other people who have not, it's easier to look over there because that's really the only reference. They've never really had injustices placed in their lap before. So thank you, sis.
Good evening.
Good evening, friend.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
So first and foremost, I want to thank you. Again, welcome back. In terms of Erasure, just as a point of reference for people who may not know, the National Park Service in 2016 published its first ever LGBTQ heritage theme study.
Yes.
So it's a study that is done by the Park Service before, as they're trying to figure out a subject area where they want to look toward the idea of landmarking things for the National Register of Historic Places, things like that. So there's one for Reconstruction, there's one for slavery, there's one for women's history, abolition, labor, all of that. That was removed from the National Park Service's website a few months ago. And I'm actually one of the chapter authors of that study. My chapter focused on African American LGBTQ historic places. So I always, when I have an opportunity, let people know that this idea of the disappearing of knowledge is real.
Yeah.
It's happening. Yes, that whole study can actually be accessed in different places now, but it's happening.
Right.
So it's always important to just remember that. In terms of, there's so many things to say,
Yes.
but it's unfortunate, as an historian myself, and I work in historic preservation, that there are so many people who love going abroad and engaging the history, the historic places, the difficult conversations and things like that. And they can't do that, and they can't. They won't do that here.
Right.
Imagine taking a Mississippi River cruise.
Right.
Pray that if you do, you actually find a plantation site that actually will engage you with the full history of said site, rather than somebody approaching you in a giant hoop skirt having their best Gone with the Wind fantasy. So I just implore everybody here, is again working this field, as you travel, as you go out in the world, look for those places that are willing to tell you the truth. You can take it. It's really fascinating. History is. Triumphs and tragedies exist in history.
Absolutely.
Don't be afraid of any of that. You'll learn a lot more. Have you watched Stanley Tucci talking about Italy? He actually does cover, through his food, some interesting aspects of difficult history today in Italy, including immigration. So it can be done. Just don't be afraid of it. And that's it.
Thank you. It can be done, and I think it's important for people to also, challenge what we are told. If you are on tour at some place and they're talking about everyone, but they're not talking about women, or as I like to say, I was in Birmingham and they were talking about women's suffrage, and they were like, well, women got the right to vote in the 1920s. I was like, not all women. So when we make these generalizations and we say women that just encompass everybody, they don't. So we have to be willing to, as you're saying, have those conversations, engage with people, and challenge what you know is not true. Yes.
I just had two quick comments.
Yes.
The first one was a couple years ago, I had the opportunity to go to Ghana, and I was about 45 minutes from Accra in a small town called Winneba. And we went down to the beach, and there are very strong currents on the beach. They told us not to go into the water, but yet, you know, we saw a lot of the fishermen out there and everything. And one of the people who was with us was a professor from the university, and he was like, I want you to know that your ancestors were very skilled swimmers. They swam better than Europeans. And he says, now, when we came over here, that's when a swimming slave could swim his way to freedom. And that was suppressed. And that's something that I did not know. And it just, you know, but that's about the erasure and not knowing. And we had a stereotype. They make fun of black people. Oh, you can't swim. You know, they say that a lot.
Right.
But so that really, you know, stuck with me from that visit. And the second thing I want to say is, you know, people, you made the comment earlier about, you know, some people saying why, or maybe it was up there that we should just get over that it was so long ago.
Right.
But if you think about the fact that from 1865 to 1965, in addition to everything that you put on your slides, we're still dealing with Bloody Sunday, Bloody Monday, we're dealing with the KKK, we're dealing with church bombings, we're dealing with all of this stuff leading up to segregation. So that's 1965. So now in 2025, from 1965, we're only 60 years out of what our ancestors had 200 plus years in.
Right. And now they're trying to reverse that, right? So all the advances in civil rights, which I would just like to say, can we just call human rights, right? Because you got to be recognized as a human before it's even civil, right? But yeah, all these advances are now being reversed. Roe versus Wade. You know, I saw a story the other day of a young girl, 10 years old, victim of rape, and, you know, they're not allowing her to abort the child. A 10-year-old body cannot birth a baby, cannot birth a child. So when we think about the ways in which people are not allowed to have agency to the words that they want to say, to their own physical bodies, I mean, we really have got to come together as a collective and say that we are not going to accept this. We have got to. I mean, really, the time is upon us. This emergency of an inconvenient truth with the film so many years ago, we are living it.
Yeah, I would like to say thank you again for coming. This is my first time being here. I just been recently released from prison after 28 years. And
Congratulations.
To speak to the 13th, thank you. To speak to the 13th Amendment, you know, I'm a direct effect of that. You know, I'm not gonna speak too much about my crime, you know, but after 28 years, you know, I'm putting that behind me. So April 28th, I was released, and like I said, this is my first event. You know, I'm glad to be here.
Happy to have you here.
I want to speak for the guys that, you know, are still there.
Yes.
You know, that are, you know, transitioning out as well. But the 13th Amendment is real, and you know, to the degree of incarceration, you know, it's still a form of modern day slavery. Like I said, I'm a direct effect of that, you know, being released. Of course, you know, I have a very supportive family. My partner here, her family, everybody is supporting me in my transition. But what happens there, it's like being erased.
Yes.
You know, the information that's needed, the programs that's actually needed, the things that's actually needed for those guys that are dead, and for us that are transitioning out, it speaks to all of that. Because of the 13th Amendment, you know, it keeps us from making that progress without the support that's necessary.
Yeah.
So, like, I'm fortunate, but I've been around a lot of guys that's not fortunate.
Yeah.
You know, who have lost, you know, all of their family members, getting out and trying to transition or navigate the process of being back in society. So, like, the 13th Amendment, like I was saying, you spoke to that, and it kind of like resonated with me because you know, I just like I said, I just been released from prison. So again, I thank you.
Thank you.
I definitely want to get, this is my mother's birthday on the 14th, and actually one of my brothers, so he did speak about that, so maybe I could get down there again and, you know, be a part of this.
Absolutely.
I just wanted to speak on that, the 13th Amendment, and I thank you for the time.
Thank you. Can we give a round of applause for 28 years? Welcome home. Welcome home. Wow.
We're almost out of time. We have
Okay.
time for 2 more comments. I have
Okay.
this gentleman, and I have you in the corner.
Okay.
Thank you for the great presentation this evening, and I do very much agree with your thoughts about we've been here before. To me, it seems like we're going through a second retribution, because after the Civil War, we had Reconstruction, and then we made some progress, and it seems like after we had a black president and we had people of color in power and position, there were some people that were not happy with that. And here we are trying to take those things away from us. So to me, it feels like we're going through a second, or the country is going through a second retribution. So we have been here before, and we will get through this.
We will get through it, absolutely. Thank you for your comments.
One final thought from Queen Mother.
I'm going to step down.
Thank you. I'm sure you're familiar with, but maybe many others may not be, and I'd
Yes.
like to encourage them to get familiar with Isabel Wilkerson's cast,
Oh, yes.
The Discontented Fire. Anyhow, in there, she talks about an issue that I'm really involved in before. I come from South Carolina.
Oh,
All right. And she talks about the fact that when students went to become teachers in South Carolina and other southern states, once they got their degree, they were not certified. So they had to get certified. Now, this is the issue. Once they got certified, those that made A's and B's on state teachers' exam to get certified were the last ones to be hired
wow.
to
Wow.
teach our children,
Yeah,
because it was all segregated at that time.
right, right.
She tells you that students who are A students were the last ones to be hired
Yeah,
to teach our children.
yeah.
Now, I'm very familiar with that. My 2 older sisters went to South Carolina, Allen University in Columbia, South Carolina.
Okay.
All right. When my second oldest sister was a chemistry major, came out with honors in chemistry. When they looked around for students to be taught chemistry, well, no, she couldn't teach chemistry. They placed her in the 5th grade. And in the South, in the 5th grade, you don't even have a curriculum that talks about chemistry.
Right, right, right.
Okay. So when they attempted to, we call it desegregation or integrate the schools, they select the ones that they want to go into their schools.
Right.
Even so, she was not selected to teach chemistry the first 2 years. But listen to this. The mayor of the town, well, I don't know whether he demanded her, but he sought her out to tutor his students
Wow. Wow.
in chemistry.
Yeah.
And the word got around that they had little sessions, various places, that other parents would come and listen to my sister tutor.
That's
just
incredible.
That's just how they treated
Yeah.
our own children.
Yeah.
Our own children.
Yeah.
Now, in the city of Hampton, when we integrated or desegregated the schools, they selected 26 of us, we're still working on it, to get us recognized. I'm the last one alive.
Oh, my goodness.
They don't have any information on us at all.
Really?
Nothing in their archives. And we've had very difficult getting officials to even boards, school boards, superintendents who look like us.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah.
The Lord's going to get it done.
No, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. And that's why I said, you know, we often have to reach across the table, and sometimes people don't look like us, and sometimes the people who do look like us are not our allies. So, I mean, it just depends. I mean, it's really the spirit of the person, right? Whether or not you connect, whether or not you have the same philosophy of life, you share the same integrity, you share the same values. That's what's important. So and the spirit, of course, the soul of the person. So I hope you are successful in that. I really do, because it's important to make sure that we are noting our history and remembering our history. You know, I was telling someone, you know, this notion of remembrance, I'll just close with this. Remembrance happens in June, the second Saturday in June. It happens in South Carolina, it happens in New York, it happens in Panama, it happens in a lot of places around the world. What makes Hampton unique is that in British North America, this is where slavery began. And it's also the story of where slavery ended, or the seeds of freedom were sown through the contraband story. So remembrance is that middle part of the story, literally the middle passage, and is also the middle part of the story. It is a ceremony that honors people who did not get a proper burial. And so we come out for this ceremony to honor them. So I invite you all personally to come to Remembrance, bring a friend to learn about this history. These are the chapters, the untold chapters of American histories. And they say they're inconvenient truths, but I think they are wonderful truths that we need to talk about. Not that slavery was wonderful, but we need to acknowledge this history and the people who died along the way. Thank you.
Come to Fort Monroe on Saturday from 11 to 3, I believe it is, or 2. Then you can come to the American Theater at 3 for the matinee.
Absolutely, absolutely. All the events in Hampton.
Yes, yes. Let's give Chadra another round of applause. Thank you so very much. Once again, thank you so much for joining us here. Thank you for our audience online. If you all would like to rewatch this conversation, it is archived on YouTube. If you type in Hampton History Museum, we would love to connect with you all. We would love to see you all out Saturday at this event.
11 o'clock.
At 11 o'clock EST, Eastern Standard Time, 11 o'clock our time. African and or white garb is encouraged, but not mandatory. It's free and open to the public. Thank you all so very much. Have a great afternoon. Great evening.